Love for nature. Read and enjoy. Let's read the story of a boy who was emotionally attached with his grandfather and neem tree. This story expresses a man's true love for nature. Shyamal was looking affectionately at Nimai from his bed. He had been in bed with typhoid for a month and Nimai had been his favorite companion throughout. He could hardly think of a more enchanting scene than the handsome and elegant Nimai standing erect, holding his head high against the background of the shining blue sky. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice in the murmur of the small green leaves, narrating how Hindus believe that a few drops of heavenly nectar fell on the neem tree, which is why it can free people from diseases. Yes, Nimai was the name of a tree. Possibly, their house was the only one in the world where a tree had a name of its own, and what name could a neem tree have in a Bengali home but Nimai? Shyamal's grandfather had planted the tree on the day of their Griha Pravesh when the family had first entered the newly built house. Although Shyamal had not been born then, he felt he could see the afternoon vividly. He could see his then younger grandpa entering the house with a triumphant smile, bearing the neem plant, which he had collected from the old gardener of his office, in his hand. He had to undertake a lot of trouble to find the old man's house, but he didn't mind it at all. Shyamal could see his grandpa planting it near the gate, his hands full of mud and grandma standing near him blowing the conch shell to extend an auspicious welcome to the new life. Since then, Nimai had been an indispensable part of their life. Shyamal had seen his grandpa sitting under his favorite tree early morning till almost midday, in every season. It was the place for his morning upasana, prayer. The neighborhood remembered his gentle, rhythmic voice in Surya Pranam, salutation to the sun. He even had his morning tea and breakfast there. In summer, he sat under the tree as the afternoon breeze started to blow. How he loved to see the neem flowers bloom in March and April, the air carrying its light fragrance and the greenish, yellow fruits ripening between June and August. For hours, he sat there reading, writing, thinking or just gazing at the numerous thin young leaves playing in the gentle wind, the birds coming and going, the squirrels running up and down its branches. After retiring as the director of a multinational company, Shyamal's grandfather had found the greatest pleasure in reading books on India's culture, literature and on India's vast wealth of trees and plants. He could talk endlessly on the applications of each and every part of the neem tree in Indian medicine, how the seed oil and soap made from it could be used effectively for various skin diseases like ulcer, ringworms and also to cure rheumatism, how the bark could be used as tincture. People said it was beneficial against malaria as well. Grandpa always used the fresh tender twigs to clean his teeth and the children of the house learned to do so as well. Grandma and mother kept dried neem leaves in books and clothes to protect them from insects. Neem began, or leaves of neem fried with small pieces of brinjal, was a favorite dish of the whole family and was eaten as a prevention for pox. When Grandpa had smallpox in his childhood, his mother had comforted his burning skin with neem leaves. He often told Shyamal, his most obedient listener, that the neem leaves often reminded him of his mother's affectionate touch. The shade of the tree was the place where the old man had enjoyed happiness and borne sorrows. After the birth of his grandsons and granddaughters, their Namakarana, naming, ceremonies and birthday parties had been celebrated there. His love for nature was reflected in the names of his grandchildren, Banani, Banashri, and Shyamal. When his uncles had married, the new brides had been welcomed under the tree. On Diwali, the first lamp had always been lit there. Shyamal would forever remember the day when the news came that his grandma had died of a heart attack in his uncle's house in Mysore. The old man didn't utter a word, but had resorted to his Nimai. He had sat there the entire day like a statue, perhaps trying to gather the strength to bear the heartbreaking loss of his oldest companion, who had departed forever. And his end too had come suddenly and silently. Grandpa had been sitting outside even after it was dark, and Shyamal's mother had sent him to call his grandfather. At first Shyamal had thought that Grandpa was dozing and tried to wake him up. "Grandpa, your time for chatting with Nimai is up." His grandfather's head bent down on his chest at Shyamal's touch, and suddenly the child realized that his time had come to an end indeed, even as leaves from the tree fell on the old man's lap. Shyamal was completely lost in his thoughts, looking at thin and shiny leaves. It had always been his favorite pastime. He was a sentimental and thoughtful boy, much like his grandfather, but his materialistic father had never liked this. Shyamal's mother came in with the news of the day. "Well, son, I have a surprise for you. Do you know our new car is coming today?" This was great news indeed, and the boy was highly excited. He jumped down from his bed and announced, "I am not going to lie here anymore. This evening itself, I am going on a long drive with Papa." When the first rush of excitement was over, his mother tried to break the next news to Shyamal cautiously. "Your papa says that we have to cut Nimai down as we are going to need a garage for the new car." Shyamal could not believe his ears. He turned pale because of the severity of the shock. When he was finally able to speak, his voice sounded weak. "Mummy, how could you ever think of that? Would you ever think of killing me or Banani just because of lack of space? Don't you remember Grandpa at all?" The 14-year-old boy's voice was lost in uncontrollable sobs. Mother considered the situation beyond her control and called father. There was a long argument between father and son, but the son could not be moved an inch. "How on earth could you think of that? I can still feel Grandpa's presence when I am under that tree." "But this is just your imagination. Your grandfather was my father. I, too, loved him. We can remember him in 100 other ways. Moreover, where do we keep the car?" But Shyamal was uncontrollable and immovable. Father went out in his worst mood, saying that he did not know how his son could prefer a neem tree over a new car. Anyway, the tree cutters would come the next morning. Only God knows how the boy felt that day. But one of the strangest events of his life happened that evening. The sky had become dark with heavy, black clouds. Just as it was time for his father to return, it began thundering outside, and big raindrops started to fall. The scent of wet earth reminded Shyamal of his grandfather and how he used to fill his chest with long breaths of this fragrance. Shyamal was thinking that this would be the last rain of Nimai's life, when a very bright flash blinded him for a second. All the lights went off instantly and an enormous sound almost deafened him. Shyamal could only see that Nimai was burning and his father was heard screaming from somewhere near the gate. All this was too much for the boy's already weak body and mind to handle, and he lost consciousness. When he recovered, he found everybody, including his father, by his side. To his great surprise, his father was in tears. Gradually, he came to know that a streak of lightning had struck the tree. Had Nimai not been there, his father was sure to have been struck, as he had been getting out of the car at that time. Even as he was dying, Nimai had not ceased to extend his service to his master's family. Next morning, Shyamal was not in his room. A slip of paper on his table said that he was going out with their old servant, Prasad. As the hours passed, his parents grew more and more anxious. Shyamal's father, uncles and friends went looking for him at his friends' houses, hospitals and police stations, but nobody could get any news. The 14-year-old boy and the old servant seemed to have vanished from the city. It was almost 10:30 at night. Every room of the house was lit and full of people, but nobody talked. Mother could not cry anymore. She was staring vacantly at the burnt remains of Nimai. Suddenly, somebody shouted, "He is coming!" Everybody rushed out. Shyamal could be seen at a distance, followed by Prasad. The boy had walked a long way, as was apparent by his sweating forehead and dust-covered knees. But all this was forgotten because of the big, triumphant smile on his face. In his hands, he held a small neem plant like a precious jewel. Everybody tried to question him at once, but he only answered his mother, "Mummy, I found Grandpa's old gardener's house. With the help of Prasad uncle, I brought this plant in Nimai's place." Shyamal's face was illuminated by the luster that his grandpa had passed on to him.